Elst and talk about a very popular topic the world over, yoga. Recently, there have been claims made by Western and even Indian academics such as Mirananda that yoga is actually recent and it owes a lot to Western calisthenics and, for example, things like British Army drills. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, in contemporary academe, it is always fashionable and prestigious to claim that something is recent, that the claims for ancientness, for tradition, are themselves superstitious, are themselves made up, that it is an invented tradition. So that always looks good, and in this case, of course, for Indian so-called urban naxals or leftist intellectuals, it has the extra benefit of spiting the Hindus, of belittling Hinduism. Now, this statement really can only seriously concern so-called modern postural yoga, ascribed as inventor to Tirumalai Krishnamacharya, who practiced in the Maharaja's palace in Mysore. I visited the place, so he had a room there granted to him by the Maharaja, and there he practiced and developed, elaborated a form of postural yoga that has become very popular the world over. And via one of his disciples, it is mostly known as Iyengar yoga, through his disciple B.K.S. Iyengar. Now, even that system of yoga is not that new, because mostly it goes back to the tradition of Hatha yoga, which was practiced by the Nath yogis, started by Matsyendra Nath and Gorakshanath. Goraknath is now perhaps best known as the Adi Guru of the tradition to which the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath belongs. Anyway, so that is a tradition of Hatha Yoga that's already 1,000 years old. And so that has most of the techniques that are nowadays practiced, that were practiced by Tirumalai Krishnamacharya, and that most people who call themselves yoga practitioners today do practice. And even that tradition didn't invent all of it. Yoga postures, not all of them, not so much the contortions or standing on one's head, but some yoga practices are already attested even thousands of years earlier. You have the story in the Mahabharata where Arjuna goes on pilgrimage, and on the way he practices ascetic exercises, including, for example, the Vrikshasana, that is standing on one leg, with the arms and the other leg in prescribed postures that make up a fairly popular yoga posture. So this is like 3,000 years ago or more. Some people now will object, but Arjuna is a mythical character, he was not historical and so on. Well, as a historian, I beg to disagree, but never mind. You see, if they want to say he was mythical, fine, then at least the writer who invented this story clearly knew of the Vrikshasana. For another example, Mahavira Jina, who is sometimes considered as the founder of Jainism, though the Jains themselves say that he was only one master in a long lineage. Anyway, he is said by his own tradition to have reached enlightenment or self-realization while practicing the Goduhasana, the cow milker's posture, Goduhasana. That is to say, that is a squatting posture, not on your heels but on your toes, with clenched fists lying on your knees. That's not the most easy posture. If he reached enlightenment, a very deep state of meditation in that posture, it means he was a real master. Mostly the giants are depicted just sitting in Padmasana, like most yogis, or standing, like the Chinese meditation masters. But at any rate, in some prescribed yogic posture. So again, you see yogic postures are not that recent. Then in Harappa, you find a number of people depicted in yogic postures, either in Bhadrasana or in Siddhasana, so seated meditation postures. Again, some people say, yeah, but in India, with its hot climate, people are naturally very supple. They can easily sit in a posture that to Westerners looks like a yogic posture, but it need not be yogic. Well, let them take a more careful look at these people depicted. It is not just that they have their legs in a certain posture, they also sit upright, their shoulders relaxed, their hands in a specific meditation posture, mudra, their eyes closed or concentrated. And you can see anyone who practices yoga can recognize these people as yogis. So here we speak of 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. That is how long yoga really exists.
So what you're
Say
just
that last phrase again. So that is how long yoga really exists.
okay, I'll edit afterwards. So what you're describing sounds 100% Indian, but are there any foreign contributions to yoga?
Well, very few that are indicated. There is one, and this is an area that I have myself worked on, and that perhaps will not go down very well with Indians. It is the element of Kundalini Yoga and the chakra system. You see, that appears readily made in the Indian tradition around 400 AD, so 1600 years ago. There is no sign of this system evolving or growing. It's just ready-made. It looks Indian in the sense that all its nomenclature is Indian. The iconography that goes with it is Indian. So they have very thoroughly assimilated it. Nevertheless, this notion of energy centers is new. Let me give one example. In Chan Buddhism or Zen Buddhism, which has developed in China under the influence of Taoism, the native Chinese tradition that also has a mystical element, you concentrate on an energy center, namely a point below the navel. And that center is very important, is deemed very important. What the Japanese call the tanden or hara. The hara is the vulgar description meaning belly, but tanden is the Japanese version of Chinese tantien, the field of cinnabar. Now cinnabar is a chemical preparation with mercury and sulfur, so it's something from alchemy. Now outer alchemy using metals and other substances was not such a great success, though it contributed greatly to the development of chemistry, but its stated goal of prolonging life, that was not so successful. But it came to serve as a language, a metaphoric language, for what is called inner alchemy. Now, inner alchemy largely corresponds to what Indians know as pranayama, that is breath regulation, and the guiding of energy through the spine or other centers. So, as part of that, the tantien, this point below the navel, is very important. Now, in ancient India, this point or other energy centers were not known as such. And so, for example, in Anapanasati, the first breath exercise in Buddhism, and in fact an exercise practiced in yoga classes all over the world, where you simply watch the breath. You watch the breath when entering the body through the nostrils, which are not a particular energy center. And there is no special attention to energy centers like the Tantien or the Hara. So you see that there they practice yoga without this notion of chakras or energy centers. These come into India very, very probably from the Chinese tradition, where they play a central role, where they even have an application medically, as known in acupuncture, and where you see them evolve. You see, they are already described in detail in the Classic of Internal Medicine by the Yellow Emperor, put into writing in probably the 3rd century BC, where there are also pre-Christian depictions of energy exercises. So there you see the system alive and evolving, what it is not doing in India. In India the system simply appears and then remains the same. So there I think that that is a contribution from outside. Not a very important contribution. Westerners are full of this notion of chakra and kundalini. In fact, it is not that important in yoga, and you see that great yogis like Patanjali, like Mahavira Jina, like the Buddha, didn't use it and didn't even know of it. So it is an extra, it is an auxiliary, and you can see the world over that this notion of kundalini, of an energy that rises through the spine, already exists separate from yoga. So the conclusion should be kundalini, the chakra system, is something that exists separate from yoga, and yoga conversely is something that exists separate from kundalini. So it is a relatively unimportant auxiliary, but yes, I do think that that came from the outside.
And by outside that means maybe China or Tibet?
Yeah, China, definitely.
Okay. Interesting. Now there's an academic, and I'm probably going to butcher her name, Mircea Eliade, who says that yoga originates in shamanism. What is your thoughts on that?
Yes, the name is masculine, Mircea Eliade. He was from Romania. Now, I very much forgive you the mistake. The best known holder of the Mircea Eliade chair in Chicago University is Wendy Doniger, a name well known to most Hindus. So in her case you could say she, but Mircea Eliade himself was a he. Now, he said that, ultimately it looks like a development from shamanism as existing the world over, not only in North Asia, where it is what it is known from, and from where it was transmitted to the Native Americans. Variations of it exist the world over. And one thing that is very important in it is experiments with consciousness, often through the use of drugs. Now what people were doing was they wanted some mental excitement. They wanted to broaden their mental horizons, psychedelia as it is called here in America, consciousness expansion. It's not a flight from reality as the bourgeoisie thinks. It is mostly an exploration of another reality. Now that's all very fine, but it mostly concerns the imagination, seeking mental sensation, seeking new impressions that are possible for the mind, that are not given to us by ordinary reality, but nevertheless they are of the same nature as ordinary perceptions. They fill the mind with something. it has color, it has sound. You see, it has all the makings of ordinary reality. Now, yoga is something else. As Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra defines it, yoga means silencing the mind, means emptying the mind of sense impressions, also of memories, also of imagination. Now, I would say that most of what falls under consciousness expansion is imagination. It certainly fills the mind up with things, with objects of consciousness. Now, the thing to do in yoga is precisely to empty the mind. No sense impressions, no imagination, no memories. So yoga is something distinct from shamanism. Nevertheless, Eliade has a point. You see, yoga stems from that universal human seeking for something mentally superior, for a more real state of consciousness. Only it went beyond most others. It saw at some point that these sensations triggered by the use of drugs were only sensations. And so it went beyond them and went to a really different state of mind, namely silence. And so there you see there is a qualitative jump where yoga becomes something really different from shamanism.
Interesting. Now, speaking of an ancient system like shamanism, a lot of Hindus say that yoga originated in the Vedas. Do you agree with that?
No. Now this is a very ordinary thing to say, but I know that for some Hindus this is a very weighty statement to deny that everything of value, and specifically yoga, originates in the Vedas. The Vedas are a historical scripture. They are a product of human beings in a specific space and time. They are a product of the Bronze Age in northwest India. They are not about cavemen in the Stone Age. They are not about modern men in their automobiles. They are very specifically from the Bronze Age. And so there is a pre-Vedic period. And in that pre-Vedic period already yoga existed. Or, experiments with consciousness existed, and people who specialized in this working with their consciousness already existed. Now, some of that shines through in the Vedas. That is very much true. There is a bit of yoga in the Vedas. The Vedas are not specifically about yoga. They are about worshipping the gods. Now again, worshipping the gods is something else than yoga, by definition. Yoga is emptying the mind, that is emptying it of your ordinary business, your ordinary memories, but also emptying the mind of your worship for specific divine persons, whether it is Jesus or Muhammad, or indeed Indra or Shiva. Those things all have their value, but they are something else than yoga. Now yoga you find nevertheless here and there in the Vedas, firstly in the third person. That is not so important. That is where the Vedic seers, the Vedic poets, define themselves as different from those whom they describe as yogis. There is a famous hymn, the Keshin hymn, the hymn of the hairy ones, and that describes the Naga sadhus, a sect that you still find in India, of wrestling sadhus. Mostly they walk around naked. They're very well known for their performance at the Kumbh Mela, important religious festival in India, where they draw the attention. Now, they existed already at that time, and they are described. See, they're typical externals, and the meditation they practice are mentioned, but they are mentioned in the third person. The Vedas describe a type of people that exists, that they see, but that is not themselves. You know, the Vedic poets, by contrast, were elite poets, were court priests mostly at the center of society. Nevertheless, even in their own speculations, their own hymns, there are elements of yoga. Take the most prominent verse from the Rig Veda. This is the Gayatri Mantra. The Gayatri Mantra is something of a prayer to the rising sun, superficially. Actually, it praises the luster of the divine creator, the rising sun, and it implores, may he awaken our consciousness. So there you see, there is no burden of divine persons or any supernatural activity or so. It merely wants to awaken consciousness. Now that precisely is yoga. So yoga is not that foreign. Also the concomitant attitude of renunciation is present, like in the famous metaphor of the two birds in a tree. One is eating berries, the other is just looking on. This sketches the difference between ordinary men who are enjoying life and then the renunciates who are growing out of life, who are merely watching and who are getting detached from it. Or for instance, another famous verse is the Mrityunjaya mantra, which implores renunciation by comparing it with fruits hanging from a tree and then when they are ripe falling off of the tree. So that's one poetic way of saying it, but the essential message clearly is yogic in nature. So yoga is present in the Vedas. You can cite the Vedas for yogic messages, but yoga existed outside the Vedas also in other parts of India. Like the Vedas were written in what is now Haryana in northwestern India. Yoga had a very important center in what is now Bihar, where Mahavira and the Buddha lived, and it was also present in other parts of India. So yoga was already a known presence when the Vedas were written by one specific tribe. So the Vedas, to sum up, are not the source of yoga.
So let's take this from the past and bring this to the present. So here in the US, and I don't know how it is around the world, but I would guess this, what I'm going to say is probably applicable across the Western world. People see yoga as something about exercises and fitness and health, and they don't see it as anything spiritual or as part of a spiritual system. Are they wrong?
Well, let's say that they begin at the beginning, at the most tangible end, and so there's no great harm in that if they don't stay in that childhood stage. So if that's how they begin and then they discover that there is more to it, that would be the normal course of things. Of course, I am aware that in America there are yoga studios that do nothing but physical exercise. Well, that is of course a degenerative trend.
And speaking of this kind of, I guess I'd call it the business side of it. So yoga's turned into a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Maybe, I don't even know, maybe tens of billions of dollars. And I think a lot of that might be driven by Americans, and particularly you could say the American elite, the upper classes of America probably latched onto this maybe around the 1960s or 70s. And it's grown tremendously, and it's become a force all over the world. there's a lot of, as is part of the American culture, a lot of experimentation. Some people might say innovation. That can go all over the map, right? Some of the things people might look at and say they're kind of odd. Hot yoga, cold yoga, naked yoga, all different types of variants. Are those really yoga? Is there any harm in people experimenting and turning this into dozens of different things?
Well, first of all, let's not idealize India too much. Some Indians are also part of this trend. In fact, there's a, and that trend explains also why many Indian gurus came to America, to get their piece of the action, so to speak. In fact, there is a joke in India that says that, if you ask a yogi what he's doing it for, he will say, okay, you see, this is reincarnation. I first started as a worm, then I became a pig, then I became a human being. Then, great moment, I was reborn in India, and again, climbing the ladder, starting as a sweeper, then I became a king, then ultimately I became a yogi, and then, after so many lives, I reached enlightenment. And then I would go to America. So, America in a way is only the high point of a general tendency. You see, when people are not perfectly renunciate, they will easily fall for the temptation of making whatever gains are possible once they reach this status of a yogi. Now, in the case of America, we would hesitate to use the word yoga at all for what is being practiced. For there, indeed, you see the many people who claim to practice yoga have grown away very far from what yoga is. So there it is really only experimenting. Now in America especially you have a tendency to experiment. You see, Americans tend to be very assertive, and so they hear of this yoga, they take this yoga and they do their own thing with it. And that tendency is just there. Again, that need not be harmful if it is not taken too serious and it is not taken too far or lasts too long. But you see what you have in America, and now it is already several decades that yoga is very much present here, that people do find their niche, offering to an ignorant public bizarre things that have something to do ultimately with yoga, but do not amount to much. Mainly physical exercise, power yoga as it is called. There's nothing wrong with the term power yoga. In fact, hatha yoga, the Sanskrit term hatha yoga, means more or less the same thing. Because it develops vigor, it develops strength and longevity. So in that sense, the term power yoga is not even badly chosen. But nevertheless, it stays there. It is just physical exercise for them, and they do indeed divorce it from its real objective.
So, crystal ball question now.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a number of decades. Yoga is global, and it's a global business. It may have started from the, we'll call it the elites or the wealthy people around the world. But there appears to be some kind of trickle-down or aspirational aspect of different societies where people see what people at the top are doing and they emulate it. So maybe it's no longer the elites, then it becomes upper middle class, then middle class, and it's working its way to the point where it's going to become, potentially at some point in the future, a very sizable portion of the planet is doing yoga. Maybe it'll become a middle class thing for every country. Who knows? So the question is, can you see something like that happening? And if that does happen, is it going to stay where it is now, or do you see it potentially morphing into something different?
I'm fairly optimistic about it. What I see both in America and in Europe is a gradual increase in quality. The contact with India is part of the reason. Indian gurus come to Europe. Conversely, many Europeans or Americans indeed do establish themselves as yoga masters, but many of them only after they have intensely trained in India. You see the parallel evolution in China, where Tai Chi, Qigong and so on are also getting better and more sophisticated, more advanced in the West. So, in spite of the degenerative trends that we discussed, on the whole, I think there is an increase in quality. And in the case of America, the increasing presence of Indians, many of whom know their tradition, also greatly helps. So I do think that that is okay. I want to signal also the phenomenon that in the Middle East there is now a large network of meditation centers established mainly by Sri Ravi Shankar. And so I know that there is a bit of controversy about him in India, but not about his teaching of yoga techniques. And so, you know, it is quite a merit to expose also the Muslim community that was thought to be very close to these things to the benefits of yoga, of Sanatana Dharma. And so if even there it is possible, I'm pretty confident that indeed, you see, this will reach all humanity. And that is for the better. I mean, of course, here and there are going to be childhood diseases like this commercialization in America. But, you know, you should not underestimate the potential of corrective tendencies. And so I think ultimately it'll be all right.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to more talks in the future.
Thank you.